Okay. But hey, but case in point, I'm the guy that's walking through the desert and gets to find the gold mine, okay? And the lesson today, because it is absolutely a fundamental part of God's work in among his people at a difficult time indeed. I'm going to start a little bit different. Tim, I'm going to do a little overview and then have you read our lesson and then a couple of the highlights after that. And then you'll understand after that why I have involved Pastor Jay in his work. Rebuilding of the temple, how paramount for us that we have been through a process of doing something in a symbolic way, but even more than that, we'll come to an understanding today of the importance of the place of where we worship God. It was important for God in Kings, as we also have it chronicled, but also it's important for us today, the place where we gather together to meet God. Two of the stars of today's lesson, King Joash. Now, if this wasn't in the Bible, we would say we got this off Entertainment Tonight. He was age 7. He came from a horrible family. You talk about Real Housewives of L.A. or Atlanta. We even have Real Housewives of Huntsville. I grew up in Huntsville. I don't remember any of this, but nevertheless, the Real Housewives of the 7th century, these folks have nothing on this level of meanness and of just the search for raw power. Jay, and I'm still not sure if I'm pronouncing it, Athaliah? Yeah, close enough, right? Athaliah had got...
You don't know if that's right or not?
You're exactly right. If I was trying to impress anybody. Athaliah, her son King Ahaz had been killed. She just kind of blew through the mourning part, and she decides she's now in charge. And to ensure that this is going to last for a good, she has all of her grandchildren. It's hard to even say this. All of her grandchildren killed, except for one. Her sister, who is seeing all this, she decides that one is going to make it out of the line of David, and that's Joash. Hides him away in the temple area or somewhere on. Does that have a ring to it? A la Baby in the Basket coming down the river, So, tied into all this, Althea is what she was. She was the mother-in-law of Jehoiada, the priest, and it's Jehoiada's wife who he and her conspire together to make sure that this child can be saved. And when they finally bring him out at age 7, Jehoiada has had time to go down into the basement. I'm not making this up, okay? He goes down and finds King David's armor when he was a little guy. That's just too good to be true. And they bring him out, and then let's just say all those who were of Althea, in military words, instead of saying they were killed, they were taken from the battlefield, as happened last week with one of the chief terrorists in the world. So, Jehoiada has the huge responsibility of making sure that Joash, first of all, can survive. And at age 7, hugely, we have to assume that Jehoiada is God's instrument of influence on Joash. And they declare, it's been 150 years since Solomon's temple. It is time we get our act together. This is no longer a place of ruins. It now must be a place where we resurrect so we can properly worship God. Old Testament, without the temple, there's no presence of God. We don't see it that way, but that was the way that they see it. And so he starts this at age 7. It's not hard to ignore a 7-year-old, is it? He gets to be 14. Smart aleck teenager. He's still talking about, oh, by the way, how's the temple project going? Well, we've had some supply chain issues, King. All the above. And finally at age 23, this is Larry. He's had enough. He's had enough, and it's now time. They decide that whatever system we've set up, we have got to streamline it. We've got to cut out the middleman. The middleman hadn't worked in 7, 14, 20. Hasn't worked in 20 years. So the plan, Jehoiada, as you will see, the priest sets up a giving box where it will be designated. Pastors love designated offerings, except when we take it from where we're not supposed to and designate it, and that's a whole other thing. So, but anyway, extra offering, and set it there, and that was the plan. And then week after week, God's people got on board. They would fill it up, and it would be emptied, and the temple was eventually restored. And God and all things were made right, so the worship of God could continue. So, Joash was honorable in the sight of God through all of these circumstances. Jehoiada, he was fundamental as the guide stone, if you will, through his young life from 7 to 23, setting up and designated. And if Hal was here, I would pick on him a little bit. I said, how would it be like that you got paid for every dime and then some every week that you were on the job? To get reimbursed, and they cut they cut the whole system out, and they were paying directly the workers, so that all of this could be done. It could be done in a simple and organized process. So, let's see if what I said halfway matches what God's Word says. Tim? 2 Kings chapter 12, beginning with verse 4.
Verse 16?
Yes, thank you.
Joash said to the priest, collect all the money that is brought as sacred offerings to the temple of the Lord, the money collected in the census, the money received from personal vows, and the money brought voluntarily to the temple. Let every priest receive the money from one of the treasurers, and let it be used to repair whatever damage is found in the temple. But by the 23rd year of King Joash, the priest still had not repaired the temple. Therefore King Joash summoned Jehoiada, the priest, and the other priests, and asked them, why aren't you repairing the damage done to the temple? Take no more money from your treasurers, but hand it over for repairing the temple. The priests agreed that they would not collect any more money from the people, and that they would not repair the temple themselves. Jehoiada, the priest, took a chest and bored a hole in it and its lid. He placed it beside the altar, on the right side as one enters the temple of the Lord. The priest who guarded the entrance put into the chest all the money that was brought to the temple of the Lord. Whenever they saw that there was a large amount of money in the chest, the royal secretary and the high priest came, counted the money that had been brought into the temple of the Lord, and put it in the bags. When the amount had been determined, they gave the money to the men appointed to supervise the work on the temple. With it, they paid those who worked on the temple of the Lord, the carpenters and builders, the masons and stone cutters. They purchased timber and dressed stone for the repair of the temple of the Lord, and met all the other expenses of restoring the temple. The money brought into the temple was not spent for making silver basins, wick trimmers, sprinkling bowls, trumpets, or any other articles of gold or silver for the temple of the Lord. It was paid to the workmen who used it to repair the temple. They did not require an accounting for those to whom they gave the money to pay the workers, because they acted with complete honesty. The money for the guilt offerings and sin offerings was not brought into the temple of the Lord. It belonged to the priest.
A lot of details there. Lot of details of the mechanics of things. So again, just to the problem, not taking seriously the worship of God in His temple, the place where God dwells. If we're not worshiping God properly, if we're not in the place where He dwells, sin cannot be dealt with. In the Old Testament tradition, for lack of a better term, it had become a place more of symbolism than of real worship. We love our church history, and you cannot disconnect church history from European history and all of those things. And we see those wonderful places of worship because of the Sistine Chapel, places like that. Michelangelo and the work, and just think how good a job he would have done if he didn't have a bad attitude. If he really wanted to do it. And yet many of those places now are more important than the Chamber of Commerce, than the Chamber of God. That doesn't mean it always has to be that way, but declaring where things are. We should build places of worship that are the best that we can do. We really should. I grew up in Huntsville, and I wasn't a member of First Baptist Church Huntsville, but they've had their share of criticism through the years for the cosmic Christ. But you know what? In the spirit of that church and what they were doing, they were trying, and they put up the best they could do in their context of a kind of a high-tech community to continue the message of Christ. And the last time I checked on them, they're doing pretty good, keeping the main thing. What we do here and what we've done in our place for these centuries was also important as we look at how important places of worship are. And Jay's going to be foot stomping that here in a little bit. Temple, the place where God dwells, and the place where He is worshiped. The solution? We got to fix it. We just got to fix it. And there had been decades of delay, decades of decay. It took, obviously we're getting the Reader's Digest condensed version of what all that went on. It takes a long time to repair an old building, and it also takes a long time to prepare a place of worship that we can honor God for centuries and for decades to come. Well, I wish that I could say that things were always well with Joash. Thank goodness the highlights of his life God was able to use. When Jehoiada went off the scene, he lost his balance. And maybe the chest of Joash now, as I would say, that's who we name it after. But it was the undergirding of all of God's people and Jehoiada as his right hand, as his Barnabas, that really steered the ship in the right. Bottom line is, leaders are important, but their supporting staff are fundamental. And in this case, it was that. Well, these three things: worship of God's people in God's house is central to the accomplishment of the will in and through our lives. We can kind of soft pedal things and say, I can see God out in the trees and in the hunting lodge. That's true, but I'm probably looking more for squirrels than I am for God. But nonetheless, but if God's, yes, and God dwells in His people, but what more powerful force can there be when God's people are gathered together at a certain time in a certain place? I think He shows up. At least when our hearts are right and we're there for the right purpose, I know He does. The wisdom of King Joash to seek the counsel and leadership of Jehoiada cannot be overestimated. It simply cannot be there's never a whim that there's a rift or some sort of disagreement between these two. They were together in God's plan. Our worship space of today must be honored by our presence in worship and maintaining of God's house for the present and for the generations to come. Jay, I've asked you to come today, and you can explain that much better than I can.
Yeah, you did A+. Thank you so much for letting me come to your partner today.
You to take all the time that you need.
Well,
And
don't say that. That'd be
no.
But what I'm going to do is just take a little bit of time to amplify what he is saying, because one of the great takeaways of this lesson, and you're absolutely right, when you drill down in 2 Kings and you encounter Joash, sometimes it's hard to extract oil from that hole. You don't want to bore. But you did a super job of reminding us that we ought to mentor these young people. I mean, does some of y'all have a Joash? I do. His name is John Wolf, and he's a little 7-year-old. And I want to be his Jehoiada. I want to be that guy who steers him toward the Lord. And when you subtracted Jehoiada, what happened? He went astray. So we should be very intentional in our taking these young people that God has assigned to us as a stewardship, a sacred stewardship, and mentor them. That's a huge takeaway. But what I'm going to speak to, and this was so apropos when Larry, he shot me a text and he said, Jay, I'm going to be doing this hard lesson over in 2 Kings, and would you kind of supplement it with the building story of First Baptist? Now recently, Mary Ruth has said to me, because we were talking about our building, and obviously little crazy Alice, the arsonist, has really thrown things off, and just the whole process of this building. We were talking about its development. And she said, you need to write that out, because a lot of things showed up in the beacon, but not the backstory. As they may say about Chosen, oh, please don't clown on me, okay, here. But I'm telling you, what happened during the building process was so important, because Larry is right. You see, a building, the church building, is oftentimes a manifestation of how we see God in our lives and how his purpose is represented in our community. That's why Charles Spurgeon famously said that a church is a sermon in stone. I like that. A church building can be a sermon in stone. Now, First Baptist has had a very, very special presence in downtown Montgomery, really since 1829. And when I came here, and I'll never forget coming up to that church facility. And oh my goodness, I was taken with it when I met Dale Huff, March of 1981, over 40 years ago. And I thought, this place looks like that building we saw in Florence, Italy. And he said, well, that's because it's modeled after the church, the Duomo of Florence, Italy. We walked inside, and he showed me the Tiffany stained glass windows and all of the ornate beauty of that church, the Chantz organ at 40 ranks. And I thought, this is an impressive place, because this people in 1905 said, we're going to give our best to God. And so as we began this process of coming to Montgomery, because I came here, by the way, our story for God's glory. Who is that young couple? That is me and Mary Ruth. Circa 1981, after seminary, God called us to come here to Montgomery at the invitation of Dale Huff. And in 1984, we went to Alexandria, Virginia. But in 1991, the Lord put it on our heart to come back. And we loved Alexandria. We'd seen some great fruit there. But we came back. We took Jason with us, and we came back with Mary Austin. We came back with little Sarah, and Alex was going to come along next. And the church started to grow. When we came here in July of 1981, that was the initial time, and then left in 84 to Alexandria, Virginia, had an incredible 7 years there. But on April the 15th, 1991, the church called us to come back. And I preached my first sermon as the pastor on May the 12th. I'll never forget it. It was Mother's Day, and who would sing but this lovely little couple, Kurt and Tanya McLemore. They were singing the special that day. And I'm telling you, God started to pour people on us. The first year, we had 303 new members. And that was quite an infusion of growth. So we had all these new people coming, and it's like, I don't know, call it a family dinner table. We were running out of space at the table. We needed to do something. So the obvious thing when you have gorgeous facilities is you just multi-use them. And so we decided to start multi-using them. And I went back and checked some old beacons just because I wanted to get this accurate for a future story. And then Larry, you were the motivator on this. We started in 1992, 3 services and 2 Sunday schools. And we did that for 12 years. I had no gray hair before 12 years of preaching 3 morning worship services. And we then started this process of analyzing where we were going. Are we just going to stay stuck, or are we going to go forward? We're going to do everything to glorify God. And some of them were around. But a guy named Bill Nix, many of you know that name, he was our chairman of deacons. And so we said we need a plan, a roadmap. And we came up with this long-range plan. A guy named Louis Spot and his precious wife, Virginia, was our organist. He stands up, and he was a sixth-generation member of this church. And he rattled the rafters when he said, we need to consider expanding our sanctuary. A holy hush fell over that moment, because it was as if we were talking about something so sacred, our museum quality building. Well, we began by creating a group led by a fella named Marvin Huey. And it was a space utilization group. And we just acknowledged that we needed, it was kind of like we were driving an antique car. Wonderful, beautiful, intriguing vehicle. But we needed something larger, more modern, needed a bigger fellowship area. You know, the fellowship area in the back of the sanctuary is only 600 square feet. So to have enough space for people, we were doing the living Christmas tree 9 times, because the sanctuary only held 625, including the choir hall. And how about all those bathrooms we have? Come on. And, people would come forward at the end of the service, and I would say, we've got 1 for baptism, 2 for new members, and 3 for the bathroom. Because you had to go to the bathroom by going through the front. It was just maddening. So anyway, Marvin Huey, he says, I'll do it. He's an architect in the church. Get together this big group, have consultants come in like Bernie Spooner from the Sunday School Board, and we birthed the plan. The church adopted it. And in 1996, we formed a building committee. And the amazing, heroic Burke Silvest stepped forward. He said, I'll do it. He did that job for 11 years. He went through a heart attack, a 5-way bypass. What he put into it was unbelievable. But we've got some awesome Christ followers here, because we were trying to do what? We were trying to be the manifestation of Jesus with a better facility to facilitate making disciples. That's what we're all about. And so we worked in a 15-member committee about a gazillion hours. We would come up and meet at 5:30. A lady named Martha Hawkins would fix us supper, and we would meet a lot of times till 10 p.m. at night, because we were having to do this sacred task of figuring out, how would we go forward? How would we take all of this facility and do it right? We had to select an architect, determine the size, materials, do a master plan, selected Dave Payne and Rory McKean to take this thing forward. And I'm telling you, Rush Stallings from Bear Brothers came aboard. And uniquely, a lot of times you're adversarial when you're doing a process like this. All these guys join our church. They see what we're doing. They not only buy into it, they become part of it. So it was really a special time. In 1998, this guy named Boyd Christenberry, and of course Chris Anderson is Boyd's daughter. He was the chairman of the pulpit committee that invited me here, the number 2 guy at Alpha. He embraces the task of raising funds. And we realize in a facility like we have in our old sanctuary, we can't just do a Butler building. We couldn't do a metal building. We've got to do something that's congruent to it. And therefore it was going to be expensive. So we started to raise funds just to see what we could do, because David Payne had drawn some kind of good building. Well, there's a formula that you link to your offerings and a debt capacity that you've got to observe, or it will sink your church. And I was very dialed into that, and so were guys like Boyd. But there were some people who said, now wait a minute, we're an old downtown church, we're beside the jailhouse and the courthouse, and we've got kind of a plasma center up here and a kind of poverty neighborhood down the street, Cleveland Avenue. Are we really going to be geared for long-term growth? Can we really do that? And my whole contention was so simple. Jesus deserves our best and our most, not our comfortable minimum. If we're going to do that, I don't want to be part of that. So that won the day. People said, yes, we want to give Jesus our maximum. A guy named Harold Cushing came aboard to be our stewardship consultant. And I'm telling you, Harold Cushing was so effective. I personally, for the leadership, wrote down a pledge. I increased it and doubled it 3 times. Because I've always held to this principle. You cannot ask somebody to do what you are not willing to do. That's disingenuous. So I'm telling you, it was quite the experience for us personally. And man, the funds started to roll in. I just got to take a picture of an old beacon. Just out of 1,500 out cards, 829 had come back. This is midways. We had already raised in commitments almost $10 million. I mean, our folks were saying, let's go. Let's do this. We're going to do something special for the Lord. And so we were rolling. And then, I'll never forget this moment. It's in the fall of 1999. The money is coming in, the commitment's coming in, we're getting ready to start. And the actual bid comes in. And it comes back, instead of 17 million, at $27 million. That was a heart-stopping moment. I'm telling you, we about derailed. I couldn't sleep that night, but I had to preach the next day, 3 services. And also, I said to David, well, you can't do that. I mean, the formula will not work. There's a difference between faith and foolishness. Faith is when you trust God. Foolishness is when you tell God what to do. You don't do that. So here we were at this impasse. So what do we just give the money back and throw this all to the side? Let's just trust God and redraw. We redrew it. What happened in 1999? The financial people remember something called the dot-com bust. Steve, you remember that? That was quite a time when the PE ratios in the stock market finally common sense reigned, and it took a huge hit. Recession started. We redrew, called value engineering, and came back, and the next bid was $16.8 million. Dropped 10 million miraculous dollars. It was unbelievable. God did it. Praise the Lord. And here's what's crazy. Because of the delay, in those days, you remember 10% interest? You're getting 10% interest at the bank. Because of the delay, we had already collected about $8 to $9 million, and it was growing every Sunday. We picked up $1 million in interest. Praise God. Okay, so sometimes bad has become good, and this genius Ted Jackson figures out how downtown projects can get a total write-off on sales tax, and we picked up another $500,000 that nobody even knew about. That was a good day. All right, so here we're just going crazy. Started this 2001. Oh, what a day. A little lady named Margaret Britton stood beside me, and we turned the first spade of dirt. July the 8th, 2001. We had already done some demolition. The project had started about 6 months earlier, so it was a 4-year project is how long it took on the construction, because we were on such a tight piece of ground. And then other things just showed up. I mean, talking about, we did a chest of Joash. We did something called a next step, just attached to our financial pledge system in the fall. And we not only pledged the budget and went over at 110%, but we picked up $5 million more on pledges because a bunch of new people had come in since we had done the first one 3 years ago. I mean, we were rolling. It was awesome to see what God was doing. And here is what happened on July the 11th, 2004, 18 years ago. We moved in. Wow, it was certainly one of the highlights of my life, because it was a culmination of 12 years of following King Jesus, planning, praying, working, putting out fires. Do you think we had a few fires over this? Oh my gracious. I had, a while I was wearing Kevlar, but we were living in a construction zone, and we did all this faith building and fundraising, and this unique facility emerges. It's really one of the unique facilities in the country, because what it does is it combines the elegance of a cathedral, I mean, with these world-class stained glass windows. Did you know our stained glass windows were commissioned? There was a competition by the 3 top companies in America, and Willett Brothers won. There are 29 tableaus, and they start with Genesis, they end in Revelation. And I actually got to go up with Ann Tankersley and several others to where they were being done up in Philadelphia. The artist, the iconographer, was a guy named Mark from Russia, and Nadia was from Alexandria, Egypt. She was the primary artist. And to watch them work in this environment was astonishing. My uncle, Howard Black, did stained glass windows in Texas. So I always admired the process and knew a good bit about it. But to watch these artists perform, I mean, they had done the cathedral in D.C., they had done West Point, St. Patrick's in New York. These people were some of the tops in the world. And they created our windows. And then the pews, again, an offering of our best. There were mahogany pews built by these Mennonites. The Chantz organ at 77 ranked, one of the largest, actually in the country, one of the largest in the Southeast. And then the pulpit. I got to design the pulpit. Me and Henry Fraser went to his garage. He had some Nicaraguan mahogany, and we built that pulpit together and intentionally put what on the front of it? A cross. Because it's all about lifting up Jesus and doing John 12. And all the audio visuals, the lighting. The bathrooms. We had more bathrooms. The big foyer, 2,800 square feet of foyer instead of 600 square feet. Why? To build fellowship. But it has the functionality of a theater for the performing arts fused with a worshipful beauty in this very special church. Well, why do we do it? Because Solomon's temple says God deserves our what? Our best. Not our minimum, not our least, not our leftovers. God deserves our best. Certainly gave us a new capacity to reach people from 625. We were now able to do special things like concerts. First few months we had a Mercy Me concert. And by recorded total, we fit 1856 in there, really tight. Put a little Vaseline on their shoulders, and we got everybody in there. We had Rick Burgess come for the Alabama Baptist. He had just lost his son. And Rick spoke, and we had 2,200 people that we counted in that facility. Now we could do things like the Alabama Baptist State Convention, special events, graduations, and we had been locked out of that for a long time. Well, in 3 years, did we go broke? 3 years, we went ahead and expanded the footprint, and we came up with $23 million. One guy joined after the party was over, made the biggest contribution of over $1 million, a guy who started visiting and locked in. So where God guides, always remember this, God provides. Where God guides, he provides. So we needed an education facility to match it, and that's when we came up with this 40,000 square foot adjacent building. The cost was $13.6 million. Burke said, I'll do another one, and it was done in 2 years. I'll never forget the fundraising banquet. On Tuesday of that week, Catherine Arnold Wolf had a massive cerebral hemorrhage, a stroke, and we thought she was going to die. So I went out to LA, but I felt this was so important, I flew back that Sunday. And Catherine was coming back, but she was teetering between life and death. And I'll never forget, April 27, 2008, Billy Irvin picked me up at the airport. The electricity in the Civic Center was beyond description. And my message was very simple. Life is uncertain. Let's make it count. Live for Jesus, build his kingdom with whatever time and resources he gives us. We built it in 2 years. It was paid for again in 3 years. And the Lord has facilitated kingdom growth. Well, I can go on, but here's what we do. Here's why we do it. We're here as a worshiping community and a working, serving community to always do three things. And this is what we've been doing for a long time. Exalt the Savior, equip the saints, and evangelize the seeker. Another way of saying it is bring them in, build them up, and send them out. Okay, that's your little PS. Thank you, Larry, for letting me share that.
Jay, touch on the medicine building real quick. Just you skip
Oh, man, it's too cool a story. There's just so many sidebar stories. That's fine. All right, so there was a guy named Kenny Mendelson, and they own the corner building. Well, we've always had the stated objective to acquire any available adjacent facilities. And I mean, that's why we bought Harbin's across the way, the 410 building, we bought all of it. You bet, we're grabbing stuff. So Kenny Mendelson and I met one day and said, Kenny, and we want to buy your building. And he said, great, you can have it for $1 million. I said, well, I was born at night, brother, but it wasn't last night. Come on, man. That's absurd. Because all the comps are 1/3 of that. But he kind of thought he had it tied down. And so if we would have gotten that building, the master plan actually called for about an 80,000 square foot building that would take over that whole area. Well, that's really more than we need. So Kenny's refusal, always remember this, man's rejection can be God's protection. And so Kenny's refusal to give us that facility at a reasonable price meant that we backed off. And so when we backed off, we later got it for $400,000, and we own it right now. And it protected us from building a lot of facilities that we really wouldn't need, because the way you do church is you double use space. When you get to the point of filling it up, you double use it, being a good steward. So anyway, a lot of sidebar stories. But thank you.
Hey, Dad, just a quick, how